Welcome again, everyone, to yet another episode of That Kingsville Podcast. And according to some guy who emailed us who wanted to sell us something, we are apparently 65th in Canada in political and community news podcasts. Round of applause, gentlemen.
Out of 64.
Out of 64. Hey, listen, we're on the chart. We're on the chart. We're somebody. As always,
that guy's top 100.
As always, I'm your host, Dave Hunt, and with me tonight is Steve Ianson and Kevin Black. And we've got a bit of a unique episode. We've got some special guests tonight. We're going to talk about some development in Kingsville. First and foremost, we got to get some things out of the way. We received an email from the town of Kingsville regarding the remainder of the top 20 priorities, as we were discussing in the last episode. And this is posted on the Kingsville website at a URL link that I dare not repeat. So if you're really interested, go to the Kingsville website and search for it. It's there.
Yeah. And now I will say, because I did check that link out, it actually is a link just to the report that I had referenced.
Perfect.
It doesn't actually give you that list that we were looking for, but the list of the priorities that we had read through is available on the town of Kingsville.
Perfect. Excellent. Big shout out to our very own Kingsville Brewery for sponsoring this podcast. They feature refreshing premium beers, perfect for drinking on the patio with your friends or by the lake or after you fix your pool from near sudden death with a sledgehammer.
Or those moments where you've just given up on life and you think, what is going to make this better? You know what? A light, eh?
Yeah. Or a Hefeweizen. Yeah. Hefeweizen.
Check yourselves, boys.
It's perfect for enjoying with a bunch of your pals.
IPA.
Crafted with natural clean ingredients, their award-winning beer is available at select LCBO, beer stores, and grocery stores. Go online to their website.
And at Leah Maria's.
And at Leah Maria's as well. KingsvilleBrewery.com. Cheers to the everyday adventure. Thank you, Kingsville Brewery. It's delicious and fantastic. Homegrown Kingsville product. Thank you. Well, now that that's over,
do we want to quickly do council notes? Because there was a lot of stuff at council.
Council notes, yeah. Let's do council.
A lot of approvals.
A lot of approvals at council this week.
There was the Peralta office building. So that got the green light.
Yeah, it did. That's development in Kingsville.
That's good planning right there.
Well, it's kind of a no-brainer. No? What do you got there? What is that?
It is just a wonderful, delicious, ice-cold can of Kingsville Brewery Light A Lager. Would you like one?
Light, eh?
Light.
You're going to send it to our homes right now?
Absolutely. Stephen? Refreshing. Fantastic.
That's delicious. You know what? That's refreshing.
That is. Gary? Gary. There you go.
Man, I don't know. This is the first time I've ever been on the air and had a beer. I don't know what to do.
Put the coffee down.
Oh, right? My gosh.
Craig's not getting any more plugs.
No more free plugs, Craig.
Unless we see boxes of coffee. Delicious. Anyway, council news, yes, Peralta building.
So Peralta's office building, that got the green light. People are upset still, but you know what? It makes perfect sense. Gord Queen voted against it. He was the only dissenting vote against the plan.
Any reasoning behind this?
I didn't see the meeing. Sorry.
Okay. Well, so investigate.
I'm sure he probably had a good reason.
When those meeting minutes arrive on the website, we'll go back.
Yeah, we'll check those. So July?
Yeah.
and maybe we'll see a video at some point.
What else happened?
What else did happen? There is a new building going to be going up for one of the auto people.
Sure, wasn't another coffee shop?
Queen's Auto.
Queen's, yes.
Oh, we're moving from the downtown core?
That has totally slipped my mind. I should have written this stuff down.
It's right next to the town hall.
The old DeZiel's Automotive, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Development in Kingsville. Things are happening, folks. Things are happening.
And and this is the biggie, the site plan for the new high school got approved.
Right. So I think we'll discuss that maybe in the next episode with regards to
Yeah, there is something I want to find out about that site plan. I didn't get a chance to read into it too much, but if you look at the drawing itself, there is like a very active looking soccer field and track.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that now part of the plan?
It appeared on the diagram that they had with the report to council. So
I didn't get to see, and it'd be interesting to see some of the conversation around that, because I know we had talked about how that was something that's going to be necessary. Especially the track. You had mentioned that, Steve. So it'd be interesting to see if that's a condition on the site plan, because then they have to build it.
Again, lots of things happening in Kingsville over the past couple of episodes. So we've got a special guest tonight. Special couple of guests. First and foremost, here tonight with us is Sebastian Schmoranz from McGregor Schmoranz Law Office. And we're going to discuss a little bit about your firm, what things you do here in town, and then, development in Kingsville. You've had a lot of things going on with some of your clientele and some insight and introspective about some projects that may be happening or may have happened already. So welcome to the podcast, Sebastian.
Thanks very much, guys. I got to say, it's a fantastic podcast when you get greeted with a lovely ice-cold can of Kingsville Brewery beer.
Golly. And conveniently, our sponsorship started this week as a perfect storm of opportunity.
The next time I'm invited to appear on a podcast, I'll make sure I schedule it when they are about to land a major alcohol beverage sponsor.
Or Bentleys. Right.
Yeah.
Sebastian, your party gift is a wonderful Bentley.
Book me back for that episode, please.
That's good. Well, we are number 65 now.
60. Again, where did this guy try to hawk the stuff from, Gary? Was he trying to sell us like podcast hosting, or was he really just trying to blow smoke in certain locations?
It's some sort of review program that he runs.
That rated us 65th because he only had
everybody in Canada.
All right.
I don't know.
Did he show you a list? Like, were there actually people below us?
He didn't want to overinflate our importance by saying we were number one.
65 is pretty safe. That's a safe number to give them, right?
All right.
It's Canada.
Yeah.
Sebastian, can you tell me a little bit about what it is like being a lawyer of your type in the town of Kingsville, and what kind of things that you've encountered in your law firm?
Well, so a bit of a background. I'm born and raised in Kingsville, did my university education, University of Waterloo, and then did my law degree at Western. Spent my first 3-4 years practicing law in the city of Toronto at a mid-sized Bay Street firm. Got a little bit tired of doing the 80-hour work week insanity grind, and an opportunity came up with Terry Sims in Kingsville, who's been a fantastic steward of the legal profession in the town of Kingsville, going all the way back to the 1970s. Our office has been around since the late 1960s. Made the move late 2016, and now my practice focuses mostly on real estate, wills, estates, corporate commercial transactions, so buying and selling properties, borrowing the money to buy and sell those properties, buying and selling businesses, incorporating businesses, dealing with shareholder disputes, preparing wills, preparing power of attorney documents for people, and then dealing with their affairs after they pass away. And it's kind of a lovely, friendly neighborhood community type setup, and it's a really wonderful, a little bit slower paced way to practice law, which I find very rewarding.
Yeah, small town doesn't exactly have all the pomp and circumstances the big city, or does it?
As I sit here in my jeans and t-shirt drinking a tall boy, yeah. It used to be $1,000 suits and ties every day and getting yelled at by people and running around. Although I was 40 pounds lighter due to absolute insane stress and chain smoking. So, my life has gotten better.
It's a slower pace.
We can still yell at you.
Have you been yelled at?
I haven't been yelled at all that much recently, although I have to say the interesting thing about practicing during COVID is you're starting to be able to take the temperature of how fed up people are with the ongoing lockdowns based on what kinds of things set people off at this point. So, nuisances and other mishaps that normally wouldn't warrant more than an email and a friendly phone call. We've had a few clients that have melted down at us in the last little while, but it's always one of those where you go, so COVID's pretty rough, isn't it? Immediately after that happens, and then there's a 5-minute pause, and they go, yeah, I'm really sorry that I did that. And you're like, I understand. I'm in the same boat right now. So it's understandable.
It's not like dealing with soccer parents when you're roughing, is it?
That was in my former life when I was a soccer referee. No, yeah, you don't get people threatening to key your car or screaming at your face. That part of my life is over. Thank you.
That was a yellow card.
Not to your face, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what they say behind my
Totally
back now,
gonna key
but,
his car.
My kid totally did not deserve that red card.
Slash those Bentley tires.
Listen, Bentley, if you're listening, we are available for sponsorship. We're the 65th podcast in Canada, political and local community news. You are talking to your demographic, or we are at least.
So we've been on the podcast. We've been talking about development quite a bit, and some of the obviously even today we've already there's been a couple major ones. The new Peralta building, the site plan for the school, or one of them people think is community changing. The other one actually is. And have you been in kind of part of any of the major developments?
So inevitably, when you work in a small town and you don't do a litigation-based practice, so we don't do criminal and we don't do suing people, getting sued by people or family law stuff, you end up doing a lot of what we call general municipal law. So municipal law is everything from I need a severance, I want to build a house, I want to redevelop a piece of land, those kinds of things. So yes, I do have a lot of clients that come to me with those kinds of problems. And I think most recently, one of the ones that a lot of people have been talking about on various Facebook groups and on this podcast is the medical building development at 200 Main Street, which is the property immediately east of the current Kingsville District High School.
I believe it's 2 stories. That one?
The one, yes, that may or may not be 2 stories, as everyone likes to talk about.
The surprise 2 stories.
Yeah. And surprise, there's another story. Didn't see that coming.
I'd love to hear the story.
Oh, both stories?
We started the count. Sebastian, we have to apologize. If you're not a current listener to the podcast, Stephen is very quick on the puns and dad jokes, and you may witness a bell ring and or a goose honk. And never mind, it's part of the show.
From your new button.
From my new button. I got a button. It's on demand. Anyway.
So this episode is brought to you by Kingsville Brewing and Dave's new button.
And my new...
Oh, that could be different.
Oh. We'll see where the sponsorship comes from. Who wants to sponsor my button? Anyway. No. Sebastian.
Nobody does. So so the medical building. So what stage is it at? I took a run by it not too long ago. Actually, probably should have went for a run earlier so I wasn't sweating. I'm sweating right now. But yeah, what's kind of going on with the medical building right now?
So currently the building is at a phase of being, I think, almost entirely completed, and we're in the process, or my clients who are the developers of the building are in the process of looking for tenants and negotiating with tenants to move into the space and take possession. And that obviously was hampered by the COVID pandemic and arguably by the kerfuffle that we went through with the town of Kingsville in terms of getting the building completed.
Now, it seems like it's taken a while.
That would be the understatement of tonight's podcast.
It was supposed to open in January, I believe, right? According to the article, and great job by the Kingsville Observer for putting together a fantastic article on this.
Yeah.
And we'll link to that on our Facebook group as well. But I know in the interview, in that article, it said and that was from 2020. The expectation was January.
Yes, and I have to do the boring lawyer caveat thing. So if you need to go to the bathroom or go talk to your kids, now would be the time.
Legalese coming.
But as a lawyer, I need to obviously come clean and say my clients are in fact the developers of this project, and what I'm discussing is the facts as I see them. I'm not providing legal advice in any way, shape, or form. I'm just being asked to provide opinions on what I'm saying. So please don't use what I say today in court or for any purposes whatsoever.
No prior art here.
Yes,
and we are not bribing you with beer.
No,
although you have the beer. It's not technically bribing you.
What kind of beer was it again?
Light, eh?
We're having a good time, folks. So Sebastian,
what happened in January?
we're getting back on.
I mean, like I walked by, the construction guys are still there. It's May.
I mean,
almost.
I think you can't discount the fact that obviously COVID throws a huge wrench in the works when you're trying to build a complex commercial building. It's a steel building. You have to order materials in advance. The materials are rather copious and expensive. You got to lock in prices when you can lock in prices. You have to hire an army of subtrades to put the whole thing together. You got to have negotiations ongoing with the town and with the various utility providers to get the thing set up the way it's supposed to go. So the first 4 months of 2020 after March were obviously a write-off and not much happened there. But the biggest issue is the one that kind of arose more or less towards mid-November and December of 2019 when certain concerns were raised by certain citizens of the town of Kingsville with respect to the project and how it was to proceed.
If you've been a listener, it seems to be a bit of a recurring theme post this disposition happening, right? We see this with 183 Main across the street from your client's development and the
that office building, there was some dissent over it as well.
Right. The purity of Kingsville was going to be compromised. Peralta was unable to develop his properties. And again, Kevin did some really good homework discussing 183 about the amount of units for densification of residences, keeping the concerned individuals of Kingsville with regards to that heritage property. So, Sebastian, way back when.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to cut you off, Dave. I mean, this one seems like it kind of started the ball rolling on people being anti-development. And I think it seems to the general public, and we can get into whether or not it's actual, but it seems like that the developer did something shady and just built a second story. Yeah. And that's the general feeling around town.
But can you explain how the development process works with the municipality and developers and how this process transpired and what went awry?
Yes. So the initial discussion and site plan was done back in February of 2018. And just so that we understand what a site plan is, I agree, the building was at that point planned for one story. It sets out things like what types of businesses do we anticipate or professionals that we anticipate are going to be in the space? What's the traffic implications going to be? What's the surface area of the property going to be? What kind of grading do we have? Sewer, water runoff, stormwater drainage.
Setback from neighbors.
Setback from neighbors, very important. Building height. And those are kind of the things that you set out in it. You also set out what the permit application process is going to be. You usually force a developer to post a security bond, because if you're going to essentially agree to undertake this big of a project, municipalities want to make sure that a development doesn't drag on for 15 years. So you got to post a bond of, and in our case, it was $50,000 to say, we're serious, we're going to do this, and it's going to get completed within this time frame, and here's how it's going to work. And then you can apply for your actual building permit, which is with the building department that says in more detail, here's what we're now going to actually build.
So the site plan as a one story was approved by council.
Usually what happens is it ends up going in front of council, and it ends up usually going in front of council with a report from either the planner or the chief building officer, or from both of them, that say, hey guys, here's the Coles notes of what this is. Here's what we've discussed with these people. Here's what our professional advice is to this council about whether you should approve or decline it, or here are concerns we have about it that we might want you to push back to this developer and say, come back to us with another plan to kind of iron some of these details out.
And that got approved.
At
what point then, because then there was an application for the building permit after the site plan gets approved. That application, was that single story?
Yes. So permit number one, which is the first permit that was issued to actually commence construction, is issued in late November of 2018, and it's for a single story building.
And that's the amount that was paid for. They have to pay based on construction value, and they pay for their permit, they get their permit, and did they start work yet?
Yes. So they commence work. You lay the foundations, you do all the things you do with this type of building. What ends up happening is when the development was proposed, obviously when you develop these large, complex commercial and professional buildings, your job as a developer is to go out and start finding tenants as early as possible because you've got this very expensive building you're building, you need to put people in it. And the feedback from the medical professional community in Windsor-Essex was so positive that they realized they'd very quickly fill up the one story that they had planned for in their initial site plan agreement. So what happens is my clients go back to the planner and the building department and the CAO and the other various departments in the town of Kingsville that deal with development and building in March of 2019 and say, hey, so we have a lot of interest in this building. The town of Kingsville has a policy that says they want to attract more family physicians and other specialists to the area. We have potentially a bunch of family physicians. We have potentially a cardiologist. We might even have an x-ray clinic. We have, a blood lab. We have another pharmacy and a couple other specialists that are all interested. We'd like to go vertical. So the one thing that I think people need to keep in mind when when people say you went from one story to a two story, yes, it looks bigger, but there's an important thing to understand about what the overall footprint of a building is. So even in residential home construction, if you talk to any home builder, they'll tell you it's always cheaper to go up than it is to go out, right? The bigger your square footage is, the more foundations you need, the more expensive it gets. Also, it has a greater impact on stormwater runoff and grading and parking and all of the things you'd need in order to expand outward. Expanding upward is always the easier option. It has a lesser impact from a planning and environmental.
Yeah, we've started to see a lot of the new housing developments in around Kingsville becoming 2 stories. Right, Steve?
Certainly have. Amongst a bunch of ranch-style homes, all of a sudden 2 stories just kind of pop up.
Semis and whatnot. So yes, okay.
So it's March. We start having conversations about, hey, 2-story would seem to make a lot of sense.
Who are those conversations with?
Which
department?
So the departments are primarily the planning and the building departments in the town of Kingsville. They're the ones that generally run all of this anyway. And usually the CAO's office gets roped in a lot of these things as well because the CAO tends to, in most municipalities, quarterback a lot of these decisions between departments to make sure that everybody's on board with what's happening. You also need to have kind of discussions usually with your municipal services department too, because it impacts, how much water are we going to need? Where's that water going to go? All of those kinds of things. But the main discussions are with planning and building.
So where did the approval come from?
So what happens is, my clients go to planning and building and say, here's what we'd like to do. Planning and building come back and say, okay, so in order to do this, you'd need to show us the following things. So as you increase square footage in any type of development, you have to take into account traffic volume, you have to take into account parking volume, pedestrian access, green space allowances, health and safety, fire-related regulations. You have to take into account I've lost my train of thought. This beer is so delicious. The stormwater runoff, so roof area, those kinds of things. So they say, come back to us. You've already hired all these engineers that have already submitted all this stuff. Come back to us with their opinions on whether this can feasibly be done in the space that you currently have, and we will make a decision about that. We go back with all those drawings.
Now, was there major overall scope of the project changes otherwise than just the addition of the second story?
Honestly, and this is again where I think things get controversial on certain Facebook pages. The reality is all that happened is that the building went from being 1 story to 2 story. It didn't go from saying, it's going to be 2 story and we're going to put a strip club on the second floor. Like it was the same overall usage. It was the same overall design. It was
just more real estate in order to house the intended purpose of the building.
Yes.
All right. Carry on.
Eventually, we're getting to the point where another building permit was issued.
Yeah.
So how did that approval happen?
We now submit all the new drawings. We submit all the new proposals on the engineering studies. And in June of 2019, all the architectural drawings get stamped by the building department of the town of Kingsville, which is a requirement in order to build a thing. They need to be all reviewed. I didn't bring them in with me because you could carry them in a wheelbarrow because there's like 400 pages of them and they're on giant format paper.
Well, and we could show them to all the listeners.
Yes, that's nothing better than show and tell on a podcast.
Look here.
And then they issued a building permit, and the building permit again is your license to do the thing you want to do. So the building permit gets issued in June of 2019 that says yes, you can build a 2-story building, and it clearly states on that building permit with Town of Kingsville Building Department letterhead on it, 2-story building.
So then they paid another fee to get that amended building permit.
Yeah, they paid another $30,000 for that building permit. So you pay for your first building permit, you pay for your second building permit.
Right.
So now clients are out of pocket a bunch of money. So this isn't just, we got something approved that nobody paid for. It's clearly, we've shown it to them. They've reviewed all the documents. They've stamped all the documents with the stamps that only they can stamp. And they've said, showtime, we commence construction on it, or my clients commence construction on it. I mean, it gets inspected multiple times by the building department of the Town of Kingsville. So it's not like we were building this thing in the back of a bush on the 9th concession. It's being built out in the open on Main Street in Kingsville.
Drone to see it.
I bet they wish it was on a concession in the middle of nowhere.
There were days.
There's no foot traffic in the 9th concession. Come on.
So was there ever a new site plan?
So there were discussions with the various departments about what would need to happen to the site plan. So in a case like this, you need an amendment to the site plan. And this is, again, where a lot of people get angry and up in arms about why do you think adding a second story onto the building only constitutes an amendment to the site plan? And I think, again, it's important to understand the particular facts of this particular development, because I think you can't paint all developments with the same brush, because all of them are trying to build a different thing in a different piece of land with different requirements attached. So, for example, and I know these are things that were raised by council and by a lot of people on Facebook, and rightly so, how does this affect traffic volume? How does this affect parking? So there are parking requirements for X number of square feet. You need X number of parking spaces. And then of those parking spaces, so many of them need to be accessible, and they need to be close to the entrance and all that fun stuff. When the initial site plan was made, the traffic engineer, who is the same traffic engineer that the town retained for their advice on Jasperson expansion, where the new mega school is going to go, said that we like to design site plans so that we have far more parking than is necessary, especially in a community where you have a lot of seniors, a lot of whom still drive, and a lot of whom, or who get driven to appointments, they need to park somewhere. So we wrote to that traffic engineer as part of getting the approval for the permit for the second story. And that guy, who's an engineer, so I don't know, I don't do the math that these guys do, but he's a professional engineer, says, nope, you've got more than enough parking to accommodate a second story, because again, you're not increasing the base of the building. So if the second story is no bigger than square footage on the first story, should not be a problem at all. Falls well within the guidelines of what kind of parking you need. Traffic volume, same thing. I know one of the favorite topics to complain about is how long it takes to drive from one end of Main Street to the other, or from one end of Division to the other. But from a planning perspective, the reality is high traffic businesses and institutions and professional buildings are supposed to be built on main roads. So again, it's not like this was going to be built on a cul-de-sac in the depths of a residential neighborhood somewhere where the traffic flow would be a nightmare to deal with. Yes, it makes Main Street busier, but Main Street is supposed to be busy. That's what it's designed for, and that's what the Planning Act and bylaws suggest it should do.
So did the site plan amendment ever go to council?
So the way this site plan amendment was thought to have been dealt with is the view, at least from what my clients were led to believe, was that this was a minor change because of the fact that the property could easily accommodate the second story based on how it had been designed. And it would just be a minor amendment that would go before council in a council meeting with an opinion from the planner, an opinion from the chief building official, and an opinion from the CAO, or from any of the three that said, hey, here's what they want to do, but here's why it's not a problem, because it all falls within the four corners of what you're permitted to do on the space, and they've sent us all the reports showing that that's not a problem.
Town staff said all of that.
Yes.
So then who... Okay, we don't want to talk about specific people.
No.
So at what point then, the town, basically what you're saying is town administration made the decision that the site plan amendment would not go to council for an approval?
No. The point I'm making is, and I think what people need to understand is it's up to the town to set its own procedure, right? Because the town is the only body that can grant or deny these kinds of things.
Site plan amendments, so it's pretty common for them to go to a council in any town, whether it's here, whether it's Leamington, whether it's Lakeshore, City of Windsor. Amendments do go to councils for approval.
Yes.
So someone somewhere made a decision that council did not require to see and approve this amendment.
No, that's not the case. I think and again, this is me speculating, so I'm not speaking based on fact here. I think what might have happened is I think that it was viewed as a minor administrative change that got somewhat forgotten because at that point, building permits had already been issued and construction was ongoing. So I think it was kind of after the fact, yeah, we probably need to amend the site plan just to mention the fact that there's a second story on the building now. And it would have to go before council regardless. So any site plan amendment is 9 times out of 10 voted on by council.
Right. So even though it's doubling the square footage, it was thought that was a minor change.
Again, and because of things like the square footage of a project doesn't matter so long as it complies with the zoning and what the Planning Act and Building Code requires. So, for example,
sorry to cut you off, but it does because if you're talking about whether it's medical, whether it's retail, it's not like residential where it's still just going to be 4 people in that building. If you're doubling square footage, then you're doubling the number of bodies that are going to be inside that building at any given time.
Yes.
So that would mean there'd be fire implications. Obviously, when we've talked about parking, sure, drainage and I mean, shade is another one for any nearby homes. All of that stuff should be going for a site plan amendment that council should be somewhat making some kind of a decision on.
I'm not going to disagree on that. But again, the point I'd like to make from the perspective of the developer is it's not the developer's job to bring it before council. It's an administrative thing that gets dealt with and then gets brought before council, and you get told your council date to talk about this thing is this day. Show up and it's going to get voted on. But the square footage thing, to be clear, I agree with you. Increasing square footage in general is usually not easy. In this particular case, for the amount of square footage that was proposed, it didn't cause any problems because the stormwater and parking and all the various requirements you would need to accommodate that square footage were already existing at the time of the application for the second story.
Do you think that was the breakdown?
My view or my feeling is there seems to be a very strong anti-developer sentiment in the town of Kingsville right now, which I think is completely fair. I understand that there are a lot of people that are very proud of the community and how it looks, and they want it to have a certain aesthetic, and I completely understand. There's also people who don't like change, and a small town tends to be a very nostalgic thing for a lot of people, and it gives them a feeling of, well, I like things the way they are, and they don't want them to change, and that's completely fair. I think where the wheels fell off on this one is at some point in late 2019, there starts to be a lot of noise made on certain Facebook groups that, send angry delegations to town council saying,
you don't say,
hey, they're building, a second story on this building. What the heck is going on? Now, I would point out that had this been an initiative that was driven by council, I can tell you that my clients have been building a 2-story building for 6-7 months at this point. So it's been pretty obvious for at least 3 of those 6-7 months that there's a second story going on the building. And as I've mentioned again, we weren't building it on the 9th concession in the middle of nowhere where no one can see it. I mean, traffic got stopped on Main Street for 2 days while the crane came in to lower the roof girders on because it's obviously not a 1-story building,
because
right?
It's tall.
So, and again, throughout this whole process, inspections are being done by the building department and all the inspections are being passed and all the permits are displayed in the window and all the building plans are on site and all of them have been stamped by the authority that is there to stamp them. So again, I think the fact portion, if I get nothing through in this podcast, then this is, it's not like it was built without permits and without the administration seeing architectural drawings that clearly depict a 2-story building.
I think, and and you guys jump in if you think I'm wrong. I don't think it's necessary to talk about the residents to the east, because I know there was some requirements of purchase, and there was some legal debate over that. Honestly, I think it just muddies the water, because at the end of the day, in my view anyways, that the issue is that site plan. Because if that site plan comes back to council where it says that there's a second story, then council would have had the opportunity to ask for all of these other things. And then if it comes to council, that resident that was living to the east has the opportunity to say, oh, I might not really like it if there's a second story next to my home, and then gets to raise some of the issues that they have. And I don't know if you want to touch on this, Sebastian, but I'd be interested in your thought. Do you think that this development and some of those anti-development comments that you were talking about, in my opinion, I think a lot of those came from the general thought in the town that the town missed this one. And now these people are oversensitive and overly concerned because they're worried that maybe the town isn't on the ball and isn't paying attention because this one slipped through.
I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the biggest issues that's facing this town, and as we go into the next election cycle, is important to point out, is Kingsville isn't a boring, sleepy, small town. It might not have the biggest population, but it has really complex development-related needs. And I think you need to have clear guidance from the top down of here's how we deal with these large, complicated projects. Because I think, again, something people are missing here is it's not a developer's job to make sure that the municipality does what the municipality is supposed to do. The developer's job is submit stuff, and if they give you a permit, then you go off and do the thing that the permit says you can do. As long as you haven't lied on any of the documentation, which is not the case here. It's not like,
Mm-hmm. So the other two buildings, and I know generally they're referred to as condos, but reading that article, it looks like they're going to be rentals, right? So they're apartment buildings.
There's currently the other two buildings are going to be designed. They're going to be built one tower at a time, obviously. They're currently, the idea is that they will be a rental. Yes, currently.
And how many stories?
And I don't quote me on this because I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it is 6 stories. Yes.
Each.
Yes.
Is the site plan approved for those?
The site plan for that was the same site plan that got registered at the very beginning in 2018. So again, this all came before council in 2018 with the full proposal for everything.
When that parking was approved, were any of those additional parking units that the engineer was referring to for that second story at the front, is that eating into any of the parking for the residents? That's all separate as phased.
It's completely separate and phased, yeah. And again, it's because my clients have 30, 40 years experience in building these kinds of buildings. And you always design it bigger than it needs to be from an infrastructure perspective, because you never know what kind of demand you're going to get when you announce this project, right? It's very difficult to make something bigger once, if you don't have the infrastructure and resources you need to service that space, right?
So will Woody Crest become a Speedway?
Will Woody Crest become a Speedway?
I mean, Steve's very concerned. He already pushed for one stop sign. Don't make him get more stop signs.
I'm moving into the hood too. I could lobby for at least a speed bump or two.
Is that why Steve's wearing his No Woody Crest Speedway t-shirt?
Will traffic be coming off Woody Crest? Sorry to cut you off.
I don't have that information in front of me tonight, so that's not something I can speak to. I don't know. So I only know about the Main Street access.
Speculative things regarding Woody Crest that it was supposed to exit onto Main, and it was going to be an emergency barrier.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Onto Woody Crest.
I can't substantiate that either.
No, but that's speculation. But you mentioned earlier that when the initial proposal for the development came, there was a lot of interest for people coming in. I'm now seeing 4 lease signs in front of that building. Has the delay and the slow process of building, has that taken away the interest of people coming in?
Well, I mean, obviously that if you're looking to open a professional office in a building like that, I mean, if you do a quick Facebook search and you see the amount of vitriol and hatred that's been thrown towards that development for the last couple of years, I don't know, that definitely causes second thoughts. And I think, a huge problem. Again, because I think a lot of these people need to keep in mind that this isn't another fast food restaurant. This is services that, currently in the town of Kingsville, I think there's only one family doctor still that has capacity to accept new patients. And, we desperately need more of them. We also don't have an x-ray clinic, which we could potentially get.
So if one of those people who are currently complaining falls and breaks an arm or a hip and they need an x-ray, they've got to go a little bit further than they would, let's say, if an x-ray clinic was there.
I think, and it's the other interesting thing too, is it's being built in the heart of Kingsville, very close to a major retirement living community. And, I think if you had geriatric care there and you had palliative care options there, if you had, there was talk at one point of a cardiologist going in there. These are all services that, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, there are 2 times in your life where you need a doctor. A lot is when you're young and you have young kids, because kids are sick all the time. And the older you get, the more chronic conditions you accumulate and the more frequently you go and see doctors.
Kind of weird to build a second story without having signed leases, though, isn't it? Like they would put that money out and not have agreements signed for people to move in?
I can't speak in detail about signed leases. Usually the way you deal with these types of buildings is you usually do a lot of offers to lease, and they're usually contingent on a lot of things, like when we anticipate, it'll be ready for occupancy and all those kinds of things. So were there some at one point? I'm sure there were. I wasn't directly involved in the lease negotiation part. I was more focused on dealing with the, dispute with the town.
Mm-hmm. I guess if I'm a cardiologist that commits to coming, I wouldn't have the heart to say no. But
thank you. We're below our quota for this episode because Sebastian's so informative.
No, that's good.
Stop being so informative.
I was sad that I was being so boring that I was sucking Steve's will to make jokes.
No, I've been intrigued the whole time. The reason I've been quiet is because I'm genuinely interested in what's happening here. Yeah. Was there a point, though, that council ever did get involved or try to get involved when perhaps it was too late without them realizing it? Or did they try and, I don't want to say overstep maybe their realm, but maybe try to fix the mistake that had happened, if you could call it a mistake?
Well, there was that threat of a lawsuit.
Well, that's the point, I think, and that came, but that was, I think what's very important is that was the option of last resort. You can't unbuild a thing that you've permitted someone to build. It's very hard to remove a second story off a building that you've let someone put a second story on.
I believe there was a cost associated to doing that your client may have reported.
It was a very large number.
$2 million.
$2 million.
$2 million.
You don't have to look through your notes. We did
$2 million.
We did some prep. Okay.
It was a large number.
We did some prep.
Yes. Many commas.
So when all of this started to transpire on Facebook and the crowds were amassing, is it safe to say that administration did not properly advise council as to their boundaries and limitations, and that this ensuance of a winless battle was ill-advised to continue into perpetuity and cost taxpayers money for, months and months and months?
So I can't really comment on what the executive advised members of council. That's obviously protected by confidentiality and privilege.
Sure.
But I would surmise that your job is to take advice from the experts that you have hired to provide you with expert advice. And obviously I represent these clients, so I'm obviously biased in one way or another, but I don't see anywhere within the 4 corners of the relevant legislation and regulations where you can't continue to move forward with the project once the permit's been granted. Now, if you would have granted me a permit for a 2-story building and I would have built a theme park, then that's clearly a violation of what the permit is.
Is Country Time Coffee still a thing? We could have put a Country Time Coffee there and had all the franchises in Kingsville. So yes, you've done whatever you were granted and authorized in order to do. So then we reach the point where council has the motion or the decision to halt progress. So what were the next steps when that came down, and what obligation as a developer do you have to comply with this with having had a pre-approved site plan?
So the municipality always has the authority to issue either a stop work order or an order to comply. The order to comply is more so the, hey, we would like you to give us some more information about a thing. So an order to comply is issued in December of 2019, and it says, we will allow you to continue enclosing the building, which is something that I would really like to point out for the 9,000 comments that showed up on certain Facebook pages about, hey, they're still working on the building. Mm-hmm. They were allowed to still keep working on the building. It says the building can be enclosed because obviously winters are coming and you don't want it snowing in. There had been no indications from anyone at the town that my clients had been dealing with that this would be anything more than just, a formality. It's going to go before council. They've already got all the expert opinions they need. We've got a stack of engineering reports that say nothing majorly is going to be adversely impacted in the community. It all falls within the four corners of the bylaw and all the planning related rules. It's just another story. I know when I say it's just another story, a lot of people get a certain opinion about that, but the reality is in the specifics of this particular property, it didn't impact the what was allowed in any way. So that meeting happens. That meeting, as is public record, it gets voted down rather heavily. At which point, lawyers get involved, which is the unfortunate part of my job, and we begin to have several in-camera sessions, which I'm not going to discuss the details of, where the point of the in-camera sessions was to try to get everyone to kind of understand how we'd gotten to this place and what was allowed and what wasn't allowed, and to kind of get everyone on the same page. Now, again, it's fantastic that we have a grassroots movement in this community that has banded together, that has very clear views about what they want to accomplish with the aesthetic and the development of the town of Kingsville.
Yeah, and we've got many different other groups that do various different functions, whether it be conservation or active transportation, or, the one that's the most vocal in town, everything is wrong and it shouldn't be done.
But and you know what, I'm going to stand up for them here and say, I think it's important and it's extremely democratic to have people band together to say we have a thing we care about and we want to advocate for that thing, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that our views are heard, which is good to a point. Now, the problem is if you see an elected person making comments on a group like this about what their views are on an issue before that thing has been decided, or when that thing needs to be decided impartially, that becomes challenging. Or if you get the feeling that that group is putting pressure or intimidating council, or council feels that it is a political win to be seen to side with those people when it is not a political decision to be made, then those things become challenging. And I'm speaking only in hypotheticals here. So
I've made the point in previous episodes of That Kingsville Podcast. How many we got? 5? Whatever. Anyway, it's like a huge library. But that's my interpretation as well, is that the power of these bodies are having an unjust influence with regards to the way that matters are handled, and it then has a impact with regards to a defense cost or further investigation for, again, a fruitless effort, right? There's a winless effort. There's no way, given the circumstances of what has happened or what has been approved or allowable on a parcel or a zoning approval, in order to dispute or combat or litigate this, comes at a cost that we all now burden when, if properly advised by the authorities within the municipality, could have eliminated this cause immediately by influencing or suggesting to council that this is an issue that should not be or is not able to be disputed.
Of those services that you had mentioned, the X-ray, cardiologist, family doctor, what can we expect to be moving in soon?
I can't comment on that because, again, I haven't been involved in those kinds of discussions, but I know that there are lease negotiations are ongoing with many different professionals, but it's not my news to announce, and it's also not news that I've been made privy to.
When does phase 2 start with the property?
Phase 2, I have absolutely no idea about. So phase 2 should be going in front of council at some point. I don't think it has to go in front of council, to be honest, though. I think it's just the building permit that needs to be issued, and then the program's going to get started.
What would prevent phase 2 from happening?
Well, there's my facetious answer, and then there's, which I can't give, and then there's, because again...
Factual, please. We're nothing but facts and news.
So factual, again, would be
nothing.
So the point really comes down to this. Grassroots movements are fantastically democratic. I think the impact they had here was fantastically undemocratic. And I think the issue that people should take home from this is it sets a very dangerous precedent. Because it means that if you go out and you want to put a swimming pool in your backyard and you get a building permit and you start building your swimming pool and it's passed all the inspections and everything's fine, and your neighbor now suddenly decides they don't like your swimming pool and they make enough noise, it could potentially slow that process down now. And I think, and I don't blame council for this, and that's something I think that's very important to point out. I think it comes back to, again, just because you don't like something doesn't mean that that is illegal. And I think, or that has not been done in accordance with regulations or codes. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very problematic. And I get council members wanting to help out their constituents and wanting to be seen to listening to the issues. It's very important to listen to the issues, but that's why you have public input session.
Segueing a little bit, we found with the council's top priorities that greenhouse lights take the top 4,000 issues of importance in the town of Kingsville. But our neighboring community of Leamington also has these concerns as well. And it was just discussed, I believe, today, Kevin.
Literally, CTV did a story. They posted it at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Oh, news.
So, 3 hours ago, they posted that the town of Leamington is going through the motions of beginning legal action against 12 growers in Leamington because they aren't complying with the light abatement and nuisance bylaw that the town of Leamington put in.
And Kingsville's
municipality of Leamington.
Right, municipality of Leamington. The municipality of Kingsville also has a similar bylaw, but it is, again, to my...
Actually, the town of Kingsville, the municipality of Leamington.
Yes.
Oh, you're right. Correct.
Yes.
I apologize. I should know this by now. The town of Kingsville also has a similar bylaw. However, it is my understanding that the allowable duration until compliance must be met is this upcoming fall. So all the growers and greenhouse operators have until this fall in order to comply. Now, Leamington, obviously, municipality of Leamington, obviously has different stipulations. Mm-hmm. So Sebastian, is this the best thing for the town of Kingsville to be doing with a large part of their economic community?
So the answer to that is going to be your classical lawyer answer, yes and no. So
love those answers.
I know, I'm sorry.
You guys charge by the hour, so of course.
Oh, you didn't know the meter's been running.
Thankfully, Kingsville Brewery has sponsored us. We received no cash.
Wrap it up.
No cash.
No. So I think so. Nuisance bylaws are an interesting way of dealing with light pollution, because the law of nuisance is one of the oldest, laws going back to the 1700s. Essentially says if something emanates from your property that interferes with the use and enjoyment of a neighboring property, that's a nuisance. Bad smells, odors, those kinds of things. So light technically does emanate, right? And it definitely causes, there's enough studies to show that it causes, environmental impacts and, discomfort to neighboring property owners. The question is, are greenhouse growers going to fight them, or are they not going to fight them and just pay the fines? I think if you're big enough and you can afford it, you probably just pay the fines, and you'd hope that, they move towards complying. My view is, from the evidence I've seen, which isn't all that much yet, but it seems like the vast majority of the greenhouses are taking steps to comply with this. The issue is obviously, as we saw in the news a few weeks ago about the lovely firebombing we had close to Colasantes, there are a lot of smaller greenhouses that operate out of very old greenhouse infrastructure that was built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that are largely being leased by, numbered companies and things that are very hard to ascertain, with a bigger problem, which is, are you growing cannabis in accordance with the rules and regulations or not.
Mm-hmm.
So this action may be somewhat of a preemptive strike of sorts.
It's like a warning.
Yeah. So, hey, we know the big players are going to comply eventually, and we need to do this in order to make sure that everyone takes the bylaw seriously rather than just paying the obligatory monetary fine.
Now, do you think it's going to be enforceable? Because the light and nuisance for farms is handled differently, right? It could go through normal farm practices board. So do you see a place where this stands up in court? Because the argument now is that it may not.
So, and this is and that's an excellent question. And here's why that's an excellent question. The issue is, through very astute lobbying, the greenhouse sector is still taxed and regulated the same as a soybean farmer. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue being, you're absolutely right, Kevin. If I run a pig farm or a chicken farm, you ever driven past a chicken farm or a pig farm before? It smells like death. You can't enact a bylaw against a stinky pig farm that says you're causing a nuisance because it smells so bad and nobody likes it.
Or a mushroom farm?
Or a mushroom farm. I went to Jack Minor Public School. You could almost taste it when you got off the bus in the morning. It was so pungent.
Great use of the word pungent.
That's why we bill. That's why we bill by the hour. You pay extra for the big fancy words.
He's got a plethora of big words to use.
Yes. Cornucopia, if you will. So the issue is, you're absolutely right. So why is light any different than smell? And why should they be singled out for this? And the other issue you have with greenhouses, and this is, to the detriment of the municipality, is their industry is largely regulated, as with most farming, by the province and partially by the federal government. So the municipality can only do so much, and they only have so much authority to do a thing to do something about it, right? And it's not like these greenhouses are being built in the middle of a residential subdivision, again, too, right? So do they cause light pollution? Yes. Is that something a municipality should be regulating, or is that something the Ministry of the Environment, is that something that should be regulated by them? And do they want to regulate that? Because agriculture is important. We feed millions and millions of people with this stuff. And the more expensive you make it for them to do that, the more expensive a tomato becomes. Like, it's basic economics, right? So it is. Is the bylaw going to do anything other than make voters feel good that a town council did something to make people feel better about a thing? The jury's out on that one. And that might be, that was a law pun and nobody caught it. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God! I'm waiting for him from him. I'm sorry, Sebastian. You get.
But I mean, look,
we'll be the judge of that.
That's Steve I know and love.
But that's in a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, once a couple of these bylaw things have gone through court, I mean, then you'll know whether it worked or not. But I mean, if I was a greenhouse grower, I would probably hire myself a good lawyer and challenge that thing at the, at the Superior Court and say, so pig farmer can be smelly, but I can't have lights.
But
so
in an interest of being a good corporate partner within a municipality or town, there are goodwill gestures, and there are things that, they aren't all going to completely blatantly ignore, right?
For sure.
They're a major contributing factor to our tax base and our community, right? With sponsorships and with employment, and not all growers and not all greenhouses are going to defy.
Oh, no.
So there will be ones that do, but, let's not broad brush every.
No, the big
operation.
corporate guys, I don't think it's in their interest at all to do any of this. And I CTV obviously didn't release the locations of the greenhouses that got ticketed.
No.
But I'd be willing to bet.
No, and I would assume the only reason they didn't is because the municipality didn't.
Probably. And I'd be willing to bet there are a lot of the old, smaller plastic ones where, I don't think they have the money to upgrade their greenhouse, let alone buy shades for it. So, yeah, they're probably not going to be in compliance.
Only time will tell. Again, we'd like to thank Sebastian Schmoranz from McGregor Schmoranz Law Office here in Kingsville for joining us tonight and providing such wonderful insight about development in Kingsville. And now for this episode's comment of the week. Kevin, what do we have for comment? You don't have one?
I don't have one.
Well, shut up! I thought you had one.
No, I was asking.
Golly.
Well,
we do have something for Kevin. Kevin, you have had a touch with fame recently in your Twitter account.
Yes.
So, Kevin, Twitter is an international body of social media and whatnot, and usually, the objective is to gain some sort of notoriety and some sort of exposure. How on earth did you get this individual to become a Kevin Black fan?
I have absolutely no idea.
Please make up a story.
I don't have one.
Fantasy of the mind.
I looked at my Twitter account.
Fantasy of the mind. As a teenager, Kevin Black dreamed of having a relationship with this one individual.
And now I somehow have a very, very extended, extremely extended relationship with this individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know who it is? No.
I know who it is.
Sebastian, can you guess? So this individual was a pop singer in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Pop singer in the 90s.
I'm going to reveal how young I am. So, I mean, I was born in the 80s, so I'm not that
you
young.
may have heard of her.
You've heard of her. She's quite famous. And
Was she a member of a group, or was she a solo artist?
Solo artist, but was a member of a group through her childhood.
All right.
I know more.
I was a nerdy band geek in elementary school and high school, so I listened to like Frank Sinatra and like concert band
You'll
music.
probably know one of her songs.
Oops. I did it again.
Really?
Britney Spears has followed
Britney Spears is following me on Twitter.
Kevin Black. So
Is she part of your grocery pickup program?
so
We should- there's
the
yeah,
longest
yeah.
delivery
So-
drive of all time.
only Britney Spears has got a pretty storied past, Sebastian. She was a child artist and for the Mickey Mouse Club.
boring legal topic. You can talk about guardianship because her
Oh,
dad has guardianship over
Oh
her.
my
golly.
God!
putting
do
all your
I don't
listeners
want to
to
talk
sleep.
about that at all.
But only one can imagine why she has followed your account. And I am envisioning that she has a Kevin Black somewhere in her social circle.
Okay, so here.
She just likes Kevin's.
So if you Google
K-Fed.
if you Google Kevin Black, the very first Kevin Black that comes up is me, and then the second Kevin Black that comes up.
I almost took a drink of my Kingsville Brewery Light A and spit it out.
And then the second Kevin Black is a very famous music producer. He was one of the heads of Interscope Records.
How much
So I have
money did you pay Google to be the first?
I'm very good at SEO.
Apparently.
It cost me so much.
So you think that because her
And he's not kidding. I just tried it. Are you there? Yeah.
Can you do that for me? Yeah, the only other David Hunt is like a religious author or a minister somewhere.
Well, the only other, so there's, in the entire world,
There is none.
there's four Kevin Blacks.
Yeah.
There's me, number one, and then Kevin Black from the record label. And then Clint Black has a brother, Kevin Black, and he's also a country music artist. I actually tried to get his website and he wouldn't let me have it. And then there's kevinblack.ca is a photographer in Montreal.
There's an actor and a vice president of sales for.
Kevin.
Yeah, the VP of sales guy, I think, is the record label guy.
How,
Okay.
you can't write this, folks.
No.
You can't write this.
Hey, I was once the 13th most famous person in Windsor, Essex. So, you know.
And we're the 60th.
Oh, you've fallen, buddy. I'm sorry.
Kevin, we brought you on the show in order to bring our stats
Hey, you
up.
know what?
We're only
I'll-
65th.
Let me tweet at Brittany. I'll see if we can get her on. She's probably not too busy.
See, folks, you waited around to the end of the podcast, and we did have just a little bit of fun. But again, thank you, Sebastian, for joining us here on That Kingsville Podcast. If you need to get a hold of us, email us, write us on the Facebook or whatever. It's That Kingsville Podcast at gmail.com. Again, thank you, Gary Glass, for production of tonight's episode and bearing with us in this nonsensical manner. We'll see you all next time.